All right. Well, welcome to the Entheogenic Explorer podcast, sponsored by Mindscape Psychedelic Institute. I am Kirby, and surprise, surprise, I have Martin Ball with me again. I think I've done more interviews with you than I've done with all my guests combined, which I really enjoy. These are fun and easy for us, but I also think they're important, especially in the world of psychedelics. There's already a lot of information out on psilocybin, MDMA, and some of these more common psychedelics. But when it comes to 5-MeO DMT or Bufo, as some folks know it by, there's not a lot of really good information. And I think when it comes to talking about this topic and explaining some of the nuances of this medicine, I don't think there's anybody better than you. So you're obviously the perfect candidate for these conversations. So I appreciate you taking some time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on again. And also, I'll be sharing this on my podcast. So you're kind of like the guest interviewer for the entheogenic evolution. Uh,
Well, I
yeah,
love it.
you can use it on your channel. I'll use it on mine, and we'll help spread some information.
I love it. Well, for folks that don't know it, we work on a class together for 5-MeO DMT facilitation, and we're moving into a couple modules right now of actual the facilitation itself, but also the integration aspect of this. And we've had several conversations about the importance of integration, especially as it relates to this molecule, this medicine, whatever term you want to use for it. And, I speak to a lot of folks that are in the integration space, myself as somebody that's been certified in a couple different integration classes. But as we've had the conversation, it seems that integrating this experience is different than integrating some of these more common psychedelics. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Um, so I don't know if you mentioned it, but that's why we're going to be introducing the 5-MeO integration course. And so you invited me to put this class together. And as you mentioned, it is part of the facilitator course where I think we spend like maybe 4 or 5 weeks on integration.
We're just touching on it, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And, um, you and I both created the curriculum for the facilitator course together. But you invited me to do this class specifically on integration with 5-MeO. And for one, it felt really right because my book from last year now, it's been out for a year now, is 5-MeO DMT integration. Well, actually, not quite a year. I was still writing it at this point. Last year, I had COVID and didn't know what to do with myself. So I wrote this book on 5-MeO integration. And then you invited me to actually just put together this class for this year. And first, I just want to thank you for doing that. Something that I tell people all the time is like, oh, I love a project. Like, give me a project. And it hadn't really occurred to me to like put together a class just on integration. And when you proposed that, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll think about that. And then as I thought about it and kind of mapped it out, I realized like, wow, I at least have 9 weeks worth of material here easily. And not only that, but I'm actually, in creating this class, I am pulling from the entire body of work that I have produced over the past 17 or 18 years now. So, way back in 2008, when I had my first full release experience of 5-MeO DMT, I was one of the only people talking about it publicly, about what this molecule was and what it does and why it's different. And it's a very different landscape today. There's a lot more people in the field, a lot more people aware of 5-MeO DMT. But ever since that first experience in 2008, like many people, I felt very inspired. I came out of that experience and my first reaction was, that's the most amazing experience I've had in my life, hands
Mhm.
down. And this was clearly what I've been looking for my entire life, but I didn't know that I was looking for this. So, like a lot of people, I had sort of that evangelical bug in the sense of, I want to inform everyone that this incredible molecule exists, and I want to educate them about it. And also, I would like to see this experience available to anybody in the world who wants to have it, because it's just that important. So ever since then, I have been building up my repertoire, my library of information about 5-MeO, and I've been writing books about it and giving talks about it, making videos, and all of this. And I'm compiling all of that and pulling from all of that to make this course because to go back to the question that you asked, like, is 5-MeO-DMT different? Yes, it's extremely different from other psychedelics. The most basic distinction that I usually make is that 99% of all psychedelics and psychedelic experiences are still operating in a dualistic mode. And by that, I mean that your ego is present, you are aware of your experience, and you're just like, I'm having this experience. I'm receiving downloads, I'm tripping, I'm processing my traumatic materials, I'm visiting other realms, whatever it is, there's still that sense of a subject who is having these experiences taking place. 5-MeO-DMT, on the other hand, once we get into the quote unquote full release dosage level, that sense of self dissolves. And there's just an experience that happens. And this is often processed very dramatically in people's bodies and by the events that take place. And then it's really common for when these experiences happen that the ego comes back online a little bit later in the experience. And the person, the ego, the subject, might not know what just took place. And even if they do know what took place, they will have this experience of, well, I was there and then I died and then there was something else and then I witnessed my ego come back. Now, this is very different than most other psychedelics, again, where they're operating dualistically, the ego gets altered, but the ego doesn't go away. The ego isn't overridden. It just gets altered, and people have altered states of consciousness. So 5-MeO-DMT is fundamentally different, that it's not working the way that other psychedelics work. And so I like to say that it is uniquely non-dual in presentation, where, again, dual, sorry, I have to clear my throat. Duality is there's a sense of subject and there's a sense of object. There's me, there's not me, there's self, and there's world. And these are, really useful distinctions. And this is what guides our ordinary experience and behavior. But once we get into these non-dual realms, all of what we previously thought or understood, that just gets thrown out because all of that is filtered through the ego. All knowledge is developed through the ego. So this is a very different kind of experience and therefore requires a really different set of knowledge, a different theoretical understanding, and a very different approach to what integration means with this experience because it doesn't fit into the normal categories. And every psychedelic is unique in its own way, but we can use the same tools for integrating ketamine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, even DMT. We can use the same kind of set of skills and the same knowledge and kind of the same format, but it just doesn't really help when we get to 5-MeO-DMT. So this really unique molecule needs a unique approach. And that's what I have been implementing as I work as a professional 5-MeO-DMT integration specialist. I've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years now, working with clientele from around the world. So I have firsthand experience in this, and I've also have firsthand experience of facilitating 5-MeO. I also have firsthand experience of being a teacher. We've already discussed we have the facilitator course, but actually my teaching experience is a lot broader than that as well. So I'm just bringing together a lot of different resources. It's a very much a Martin Ball class in that I'm using my materials, that I've been a pioneer in this field. And frankly, I don't think that there are any resources around 5-MeO-DMT that are comparable to what I've already produced. So I'm simply using the best material that's out there, and that's what I'm bringing into the class for this really unique experience.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And just to clarify for folks, we have a facilitation class and it encompasses about 4 to 5 weeks of integration. But this is a significantly deeper dive. So you have your own course coming up on 5-MeO-DMT integration, February 26th. Is that the start date, if I remember correctly?
Correct.
February 26th. So that's a separate class for folks that, again, just really want to be specific about that. And also, what I've seen in this space is there's some folks that don't even have a desire necessarily to facilitate, but really just want to focus on integration aspects of it for a number of different reasons. Some therapists, for legal reasons, just really want to be able to have the tools and the skill set to do integration. So again, you'll find a link on both of our pages for February 26th. I know you're filling the class up, and I could absolutely understand why, because it is so unique. It is so in depth. Can you share a little bit about like what's the class look like? We won't talk about the class the whole time, but just for folks that are interested, because again, there is nothing really out there like this. What's kind of the structure of the class? What would they expect?
Yeah, well, actually, first, just let me jump back on something that you just mentioned, is that, yeah, I do want to make it clear that this is distinct from the 5-MeO DMT facilitator training course, which is a much longer course. And again, we do have a section in that class on integration. Um, and one of the ways that this class is different is that this is 9 weeks solely focused on integration.
Yes.
And that I do have a very particular framework that I apply to the 5-MeO DMT experience. And this integration class is going to get much more into that. I do think, like, if anybody's curious, I think both of these classes go really well together. I think that you could take both of them, and especially since with the facilitator course, I'm only teaching a couple of the integration classes there. I mean, this is one of the benefits of the facilitator course, is that you are inviting in a lot of other instructors. You're one of the instructors. I'm one of the instructors. There's guest instructors and lecturers. So you're getting a lot of different perspectives in there. And I think that that's really valuable. But this is an area that I have kind of pioneered, in the sense of, I wrote the book on it. I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now. And so I really have kind of set the standard for what is 5-MeO DMT integration. And so this class is going to be a lot more solid and in-depth on all of these issues. So I guess one of the first things to understand that I always emphasize with the 5-MeO DMT experience in general is that it's a deeply embodied process.
Mhm.
That I don't look at it as some kind of mental event or sorting out of thoughts or things like that, but it's something that's deeply embodied. And my reason for that actually goes back to where I'm going to start the class. So the very first class, we're going to get some introductions from everybody and find out, what everybody's looking for and why they're there. And actually, I should come back to like who the class really is for, but I'll return to that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sharing what was my experience of working with 5-MeO DMT, going back to 2008, 2009. And my experience was a very much an embodied process and experience. And the whole time as I was going through this transformation process with 5-MeO, and there's another reason why the subtitle to my book is Embodying Non-Duality is Not What You Think. All the way through this, my ego is asking, like, what is happening to me? What is going on? Like, why? Why all these events? Why are all these things happening? And I was never able to intellectually understand that, but it was this embodied process that then brought me to a place of clear resolution. So that informs my sense of what kind of transformation is possible through the 5-MeO DMT experience, especially when we approach it as an ongoing process and as a process of embodiment. And I don't need to go into a lot of details about that, but so there I'm gonna be sharing from my book. This is Being Infinite. This was the first autobiography that I wrote. And about the whole second half of the book kind of details, like, this is what happened to me. And it's a lot. So I'm going to be sharing all of that because I think that it's foundational for how I approach working with 5-MeO and also helping people with the integration side. And it is also what I'd like to encourage anybody who wants to be an integration coach for 5-MeO DMT is that I would like you to have ample experience working with the molecule. Now, I'm not restricting the class to only people who have experience with 5-MeO, but my entire worldview has been developed and cultivated out of my 5-MeO experiences and this embodiment experience. So we start with, this is why I approach it this way, because this was my experience and this was my process. And this is kind of the standard that I use when I am looking at other people's processes. Like, yeah, I've been through it. This is something that I've been through, so I know this from the inside out. So then I've just got the syllabus up here. And after that, what we're going to be getting into is from there, I'm going to move it to what I'm calling a contemporary history of 5-MeO DMT and the overview of facilitation context, styles, and methods, because that's one of the first things that we need to get a solid education around is how are people consuming 5-MeO DMT, whether it be the pure molecule, whether it be BUFO, or the different delivery methods. And this is something that's just becoming more and more broad.
Yes.
And looking at, so then what are the arc of experience that people have through these different methodologies? And then also looking at how the facilitation style and context might actually impact somebody's experience. Because this is one of the things that I do when I have an integration client is I always ask them to tell me what was the context in which you were served, not just what was your experience, what was the overall context, who else was there, what were they doing, how were they interacting with you, are you interacting with them, how were you prepared beforehand, how were you treated after you returned, what kind of time and space were you given, what kind of instructions were you given. And so it's important for anybody who is approaching integrating with 5-MeO DMT that they can ask people these questions and then have some kind of reference like, okay, so they're talking about this style or these sorts of methods. And then also looking at the history of it, which is pretty easy in the sense that there is no traditional or historical use of 5-MeO DMT anywhere in the world. This is not something that we have to go back thousands of years to investigate it. Actually, it's all a modern phenomenon. And because I've been involved in that for many years now, that I've been at the forefront of a lot of this. So getting into the history then once we get all that background information, then we're switching to what I would consider my theoretical framework for understanding not only the 5-MeO DMT experience, but also the nature of being, the nature of reality, the nature of God, the nature of evolution, all of which I've put under the title of the entheological paradigm. So my experience with 5-MeO DMT just completely upended my view of reality through these experiences and through this embodiment process. And once I reached a place of clarity within that really what I've been doing for the past 17 years is articulating this entheological paradigm. And I've written books about it. Like the first book about it was this one, Being Human, in 2009, an entheological guide to God, evolution, and the fractal energetic nature of reality. This is where I started with all of this. But the point is that something that I always encourage with anybody who's doing integration or helping people understand a 5-MeO experience is I like to say, try and develop your theories and your intellectual framework from the inside out. In other words, from the experience, build it from there, versus what I've seen other people do that I personally am critical of because I don't think it really works well is because 5-MeO DMT gives us access to these non-dual states of consciousness. Sometimes people turn to the Hindu tradition of Advaita Vedanta, and they look at, well, what did the Vedantins have to say about non-duality and levels of consciousness? And then can I map this onto my 5-MeO experience? And one of my big criticisms of that is that, well, the people who created Advaita Vedanta, they didn't have 5-MeO DMT experiences. So why would we expect them to have something like
Right.
really useful to say about it? Another approach that people might take is then go to Buddhism, which has various non-dual teachings, then try and apply that to 5-MeO. Same critique that Buddhist philosophy and metaphysics wasn't developed out of 5-MeO experiences. That was developed out of meditation experiences and other psychedelics. But as we've already established, 5-MeO is not like other psychedelics. Therefore,
Right.
it's not a good import. I've also seen other people use like internal family systems, which I guess that works for some people, or spiral dynamics or the Enneagram. But those all deal with parts and pieces and stations along the way. So here, let me give you a good example. I had an integration call with a gentleman in Canada the other day, and he has always mapped his psychedelic experiences onto the esoteric Jewish um, Kabbalah tree of life.
Mm.
And that's always worked for him until he had a full release dose of 5-MeO DMT. And the first thing he said in our integration call was, that was completely off the map. Like, I don't know where that fits on the Kabbalistic tree of life. Like, that was so beyond. And it blew his mind because I've had a lot of conversations with this guy. And he kept saying, yeah, I think you're overblowing this whole 5-MeO thing. It's like, I don't think you've had the full experience yet. And now that he's had it, it's like, oh my God, the map doesn't fit the territory anymore. And so again, that's my biggest critique, is that all of these maps of consciousness and being and psychological states, they didn't generate from 5-MeO DMT. This is where my approach is fundamentally unique, that everything that I've shared about this through these books, and then I've got this whole book about it, the entheological paradigm, it's all developed directly out of the 5-MeO experience. So there's nothing imported from outside. There's no using of symbol sets or psychological terms or anything else that comes from anywhere but what people can directly and immediately experience themselves.
Yeah,
So
I think you
go
brought up
ahead.
a lot of good points.
Sorry, I'm just bulldozing you here, but go
No,
ahead.
you're absolutely fine. I enjoy listening to it. But yeah, and touched on a lot of really good points. I think the map of these other dogmas, religions, spiritual beliefs, I think is perfectly well stated. And I think that's almost kind of human nature, right? You're looking for a framework that somebody else has already created, though. And, I did that. I'm like, oh, maybe it's this one. And then the more I worked with it, I'm like, there's a hole in that, right? And
Yeah,
maybe it's this one. There's a hole in that. And ultimately, I got to the point of, like you said, I'm like, they weren't using this. So my experience is probably significantly different than the majority of their experiences. So why don't I discover it for myself? Right? What feels right for me? What are my realizations? And I just think that's so much more important. I think again, as humans, we just have this habit, nature to take something else and try to make it fit. Like here's a circle peg trying to put it into a square hole. And with this molecule, this experience, you start running a lot of circle pegs through square holes. You're like, it's not fitting. So what do I do with that? And I think that's the importance of a lot of the conversations that you have with folks, and then we try to touch on in the different classes, is erase that, right? Those are just other people's beliefs, right? They're just their beliefs. You got to establish your own, and to do that, you have to have some level of experience with this medicine. We've had folks try to come to the course that haven't had these experiences, and I'm like, I apologize, this isn't for you. There's no other framework that can match it. Well, I've done psilocybin. Beautiful,
yeah,
right? Not the same.
yeah,
And you could always test that too. I'm like, well, tell me about your ego death that you just mentioned that you had. And I mean this with no judgment. There is a difference though. It's like I remember I was floating through everything. Like there's already too many eyes in
yeah,
that description that tells me it's a different experience, and that's okay. Because to me, it seemed like, the analogy, I always use this, like if Kirby was a 500-piece puzzle and I showed up to the experience, once I have that full release, that puzzle pieces are just, they're gone. There's nothing there. And as you start coming back online, it's like the puzzle of your ego, all the parts of you, all the experiences, everything that's kind of created who you think that you are, all the programming piece by piece is being rebuilt. Well, here's the corners, here's the border, and it gives you an idea of a simple analogy that I like when I'm working with folks or having conversations with folks. I'm like, you'll realize the part of you or the aspect of you that wants to change is the part that needs to change, right? But most people are unaware of their true nature, their true identity, whatever you want to call it. And if you're not, then all the conversations that we're having are about working with the ego, manipulating the ego, diagnosing the ego. And that just seems to me like it's like taking a dirty rag and trying to clean the table. It's not going to work. So if you don't have a framework, or if you're using somebody else's framework. And again, there's some overlap. There are absolutely some Buddhist concepts or Hindu concepts that I'm like, yeah, I'm in with that. But the more you do it, the more you'll see some holes in other areas, and you have to kind of develop your own framework, which
Yeah.
is, again, this non-dual, totally non-dual perspective is where I've kind of landed as well.
Yeah. And that's where I like to provide, like, this is the framework that I've developed out of this experience. And it describes it really, really well. And it's applicable, and it's something that people can directly experience themselves. So it's not asking people to believe anything that,
Right.
but you do have to go through the experiences. You have to go through the work, and then you can confirm this for yourself. And my expectation, like with this class and also with the facilitator course, is, again, I like to encourage the students to, whatever your framework is going to be, I want to encourage you to create it from the inside out, and don't just rely on, well, I've been certified with internal family systems, so I'm applying that to my integration services. I don't think that's good enough. I think
Right.
that that's a serious limitation. And it's not that people need to just wholesale adopt my framework. I have no requirements in that sense, but I've got it. It works. It resonates with people. I apply this on a daily basis with my clients. And so I hope the students will either use it or expand on it or develop their own, but again, want to encourage people to develop it from the inside out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to model what I mean by that in the class. And I'm going to give you the tools that I have developed and the framework that I've developed that I think really describes this very, very accurately. And if people are uncomfortable with that, or if they want to create their own, that's great. But also, I do like to tell people, if you, especially if you are using a particular therapeutic model or a psychological model or a spiritual model, I do encourage people that at the very least, if they're not going to let it go and develop something from the inside out, then at the very least, you should be really upfront about that and say,
Sure.
oh, my integration is using family systems therapy. Now, I'm not all that familiar with family systems therapy, but I don't think, like, my understanding of that is that psychologically you have different representations of sort of different roles and family members within your psyche that you can interact with. And it's like you're saying, those are still all just the puzzle pieces. Well, what's beyond that? So if your model doesn't have an accounting for the totality, the non-dual totality of being, I don't think it's that good. And one of the predominant aspects of the 5-MeO DMT experience that I think everyone can agree on is that's a lot of energy. And so we need to have an understanding of the energetics, the phenomenology of the energetics. How does this energy work? What does it do? How do I process it in my body? And then that also going to bring us to, how is my ego an expression of energy? How are my thoughts an expression of energy? How are my feelings an expression of energy? How are my gestures, my body language, my tone of voice? These are all aspects of energy. So I like to take what I call a non-dual energetic perspective on the nature of reality and the nature of psychedelic experience. And that through that, we can develop a fairly easily understood idea of what the ego is, how it is embodied, how it functions, how it expresses, and then what happens when we go beyond it. And then also what happens at the very least when we remove sort of the conscious guardrails of the ego, and then we start to expose unconscious patterns, energies, and materials, which, as you and I both know, happens all the time on 5-MeO in a way that doesn't happen with other psychedelics. So I do think that it's possible to have a deeply informed perspective of the energetics of this phenomenon of working with this molecule. And we don't really need to import anything from anywhere else. So I've been working to, like, remove all of this extra stuff so that we can really deal with the meat of it. And again, with this course, training people to be 5-MeO integration specialists, like, this is the required education that I think you need. That I just don't think that a standard integration program will cut it. But anyway, I wanted to complete the question. So anyway, we've got next class on non-dual energetics, the entheological paradigm, and the human ego. Then after that, so that's like the overview. Like, this is reality. And
Let me
how,
do this. Let me help you out. I want to give folks an idea of what it actually looks like, if you're okay with that. I'm sharing
sure.
your work. I hope that's okay. Um, because I think it's important for folks to actually see the depth of it as well. And you can see the amount of time and energy that was put into it to kind of create it. You talked about the overview, the history and facilitation, the non-dual energetic and theological paradigm, and some of these other topics. Or any one of those you want to touch on?
Yeah, so the next section then, so the course is broken down into modules of like these different themed classes kind of going together. So the next one that we've got here is the phenomenology of the 5-MeO-DMT experience. Now, for anybody who's not familiar with the term phenomenology, this comes out of philosophy, and it is the idea of we need to describe the phenomenon without necessarily explaining it. Like first, we need to, if we want to understand something, we have to understand what takes place, what happens, what's the phenomenon. So this is a place where I think I have really excelled and really contributed to just public discourse around 5-MeO-DMT, where I have gone to great lengths, like, so that would be this book here, Entheogenic Liberation, that gets into these are all the different ways that people experience 5-MeO-DMT. This is what they're experiencing. This is how it's demonstrated through their body, through their embodiment. This is why they're making sounds like this, getting into things like glossolalia, speaking in tongues, spontaneous movements in the body, vibrations, toning, of course, all the different kinds of purging, full body orgasms, all of this stuff, which again, from other psychedelic experiences, we don't deal with these kinds of things.
Right.
Other psychedelics, for the most part, like some of these phenomenon do show up, but it tends to be very rare. Whereas with 5-MeO-DMT, like this is standard, this is par for the course.
Right, consistent.
And then we get into all the reactivations, after effects, night school, ongoing emotional processing, purging, potentials for depression and anxiety, ontological shock when people's complete worldview is overturned. And this is the reason why we're focusing extensively on these issues is this is a major feature of helping people integrate 5-MeO-DMT. So here's where it gets into the next section. Is like the three I've identified the three facets of 5-MeO-DMT integration. Is what happened, what's going on now, and what am I supposed to do with this? Like, how do I apply this? So in other words, when working with integration clients, it's almost always we need to review what their immediate experience was, and then we need to look at what are you experiencing now afterwards, which again, we get all these unique phenomenon that don't tend to show up with other psychedelics. And then we can get into the question of helping people integrate and work with, and that's even, I think the best phrase is learning to work with the energies, and that produces integration, but that it's not an intellectual exercise, that it's really more about embodiment, what's going on there. And this is a huge portion of helping people integrate 5-MeO. That one of the leading things that people bring to me in their sessions is, I just want somebody to talk to about this, who like knows this, who can relate to what I'm sharing. And here again, if you don't know what 5-MeO-DMT is like, there's no way you as an integration coach can actually relate to what people are saying, because it seems so far out there compared to psychedelics that it's not relatable.
I think you hit on a big point, and I'll give it back to you. I think what's often overlooked is really this first step, right? We talked about some other therapeutic modalities, but that's therapy, right? Integration, especially with this, the first and you've got the three facets. In my mind, one of the first steps is what even happened.
Yeah.
Right. And so for folks that are just stepping into the space for the first couple times, and that was my first experience, and I recorded myself afterwards trying to download, and my first phrase was, I don't even know what happened to me. Like, what was that?
Yeah.
There's no parts work. There's no, cognitive behavior therapy. There's nothing that's going to fit with that. It's like, I have to understand what happened to me first. And then what does that mean? You can't even make sense of the experience or then do anything with it unless you know what's happened to you. And this is where I think integrating this is significantly different, again, as we've touched on these other psychedelics or these other compounds, is in these other, experiences with ayahuasca. I remember, like you said, I had downloads. It's like, oh, you need to be a better human. Like all these things that I could work with. Okay, great. I know I need to do these things, or I've got some material to work with. I think one of the first steps is what happened to me.
Yeah.
And even just explaining to folks what the experience was, what's happening during this experience. So many people have this experience. Again, they'll have these like one-off experiences. They'll show up, they'll do a ceremony, and they go home, which I also think is why this is important. If you are facilitating 5-MeO, I personally think you need to learn how to integrate it, because these folks don't really have anybody else to go to, and traditional integration is not working because you don't even know what happened yet. So again, what happened to me? What's that look like? And then you can start shifting into a little bit different layers of integration. And some of these other modalities, like I love IFS parts work, but that's a therapeutic modality, right? And we're not therapists, we're integration specialists. So I'm going to create a distinction between the two. I do acceptance and commitment therapy. That's great. That's a therapeutic modality. And yes, they can kind of intertwine later in the process, potentially, once they've integrated this experience, but it's not an integration tool, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great distinction that um, integration specialists are not therapists, and we are not engaging in therapeutic paradigms and modalities. And again, with 5-MeO DMT, the biggest part of being an integration specialist is just helping people understand what they went through, what they're going through now, and what they possibly can do with it. And that's where we need a really rich education. We need a lot of information to come from. And because people they're going through the most mind-blowing experience. I mean, literally mind-blowing experience that a human being can have. And this is the absolute apex of human experience that brings us into the absolute nature of being. Now, this is something that outside of the 5-MeO DMT experience, 99.99% of humanity has never experienced anything even remotely like this. And
Correct.
even people who have spent years meditating or doing spiritual practices that they feel are bringing them towards some kind of non-dual realization, they barely even touch the depth of what 5-MeO DMT opens up within people. So not only is there no historical precedent for this, and there's no intellectual or philosophical systems that have been developed um, seriously outside of my own to deal with this. There is no therapeutic modality that knows how to deal with this. And so this is just about educating people so that they have a rich understanding and know what are the concerns, what are the issues, what is the range of what are considered normal phenomenon. That's a huge part for so many people looking for integration is they're like, I I don't know what happened. I don't know if this is normal or not. And now I'm experiencing all these things afterwards, and I don't know if that's normal. I might, sometimes people are really in a state of fear that they feel that they might have like broken themselves in some way, or they're just like, I can't relate to anyone because this was so monumental and so beyond anything I could have imagined. I just need help. I need to talk to someone. And that's a big part actually of the integration training is and this is a huge part of this book, 5-MeO DMT integration, where I list like these are all the questions that I ask people. And then a big part of your job is listening.
Yeah.
Then getting that information and then being able to say with confidence, you're doing fine. This is normal. You're not broken. You haven't done anything wrong. And giving people that reassurance because not everyone's going to be seeking integration with 5-MeO DMT, but often those who do um, they're having a really difficult time. And
Right.
this is not to dissuade people from working with 5-MeO DMT, but it's part of the education is that we need to have an understanding that this is so monumental that going into it, you might think you're prepared. No one, no one on the planet is really prepared. And even sometimes this also comes up a lot in integration calls that people tell me, well, the first time I did it was just like so beautiful and so easy. And I say, yeah, mine too. And they say, and then the second time it was so hard and like I was screaming and yelling. It's like, oh yeah, that was me too, right? So again, I've had the experience. I know about this. And oftentimes the 5-MeO DMT experience is quote unquote sold to people with as this is so beautiful, it's infinite love, it's union with God, and yeah, it's all of those things. But it can also be really, really challenging and really terrifying.
Yes.
But that's part of the experience. And so working with what we have, working with what we know, with what is normal is just so important. And that's where I want to help educate people about this so that there can be more people bringing the required depth of knowledge and skills into the space.
Yeah, because as you touched on, it's so rapid. I mean, I meditated for years, right? Read all the books on non-duality Buddhism, all of these, different perspectives. And, what I felt, in my first experiences, I was coming out of the medicine. I'm like, oh, that's what all that reading was about, right? Intellectually, I thought I had an understanding. Unconditional love, yeah, I get it, right? One with everything, pure consciousness, I got it. I didn't get it until I got it. And what can happen is this happening so fast, so rapidly. So, you probably same as you. I talk to folks that have been doing yoga and meditation and breath work, and they're like, yeah, I've experienced that. I'm usually like
Yeah.
maybe I can't say you didn't, but even if you had experienced that, like, the thought is if I'm walking through the woods with my dogs and I see a guy building a bridge and he's like, yeah, I've been building this bridge to the other side for the last 20 years, board by board, piecing it together to get to this other side of pseudo enlightenment, awareness, whatever you want to call it, pure consciousness. And I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm like, well, there's a ferry 50 yards down the road and it costs you a nickel to get to the other side, right? That's what this experience is like. But it's so rapid, it's so fast that can be destabilizing for folks. Because as we mentioned when we first started the conversation, it completely shifted your worldview. And I see that, especially with people that have heavy frameworks, whether it be religious or whatever it may be, that they're like, this is it. This is the nature of reality. And to have that shift so rapidly, right, could be destabilizing for some folks. Um, and I'll ask you a question on that. And you also touched on not everybody that has the experience, necessarily needs to come in for integration or gets integration. I'd recommend everybody that has this experience. First off, the facilitator you're working with should already start helping you build a framework about the potentiality of the experience. No, we can't completely prepare you for it, but we can help build this foundation of non-duality, where you may end up on the other side. So when your worldview is completely shifted, you have something like, oh, that we talked about that makes a little bit more sense. But for me, I've done it so many times, and it was because I didn't have anybody that could help me make sense of the experience. So my experiences were all nice. They were all gentle, in comparison to a lot of the folks that we're working with. But still, I was missing out on this opportunity to really get a better understanding. And like I said, my first experience, I'm like, I don't even know what happened to me. It'd have been so much more beneficial to have somebody say, look, here's the nature of this experience beforehand. And then afterwards, I would have been able to do so much more with that experience. And it's such a big experience that it's like minimum effective dose. If you don't need to do it 200 times, you only need to do it a few times, because you could build this framework and step into that framework. That's obviously more beneficial. So again, I think that rapid worldview shift can be destabilizing for folks. But the question I have is, and that's my experience too, a lot of folks, their first one's beautiful, easy, and they just assume their second experience is going to be very similar. But I give folks a heads up as they're coming into the space potentially for the second time, that it's not necessarily going to be like that. Why do you think that is? What is it about the second one or potentially the third one that really rattles some folks, or destabilization feels like a little heavy, but that makes it a little bit more difficult to process or integrate. What's your opinion?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've tried to delineate is that I do think that there are two very general trajectories of people's experience through 5-MeO. Now, this is assuming that we're working with full release doses. If we're not working with full release doses, then this doesn't really apply.
Sure.
But assuming we're working with full release doses, one trajectory is people have to encounter all the places that they're holding on, all the places they're full of resistance, all the places they're full of maybe self-loathing or self-hatred and judgment, regret and trauma, and normal human stuff. But to go into the infinite and go into the all, you have to be able to let go of all of that. And so some people, their first several full release doses of 5-MeO are all about processing that. And these are people who are throwing up all over themselves. They're screaming, they're yelling, they're trying to run away, all kinds of different ways that that can present. And then once they've reached a certain level of trust and acceptance and allowance within themselves, then they can finally give themselves permission to go all the way. And then they have, they hit that divine love bomb and they're like, oh, this is what everybody's talking about. Finally, I got there and I'm having this experience. And that's usually a pretty radical revelation for people, because still going through all of that more tumultuous stuff, they feel like they're understanding what 5-MeO is, but actually they're encountering the resistance within their ego to the potential of the experience. So they're still not actually getting the fullness of the experience. So that's one trajectory, as I like to say, unwinding and releasing first, and then going all the way into the non-dual potential. Now, for other people, they are in a position where in that very first experience, they have the inner capacity to just let go. And I was one of those people. And now it's not that anybody's better or worse than anybody else. Again, these are just two general trajectories. So you let go and it's like, oh my God, wow, this is it. This is amazing. But if we keep going back to that, then 5-MeO DMT is just another means of spiritual bypassing. I just want to go back into bliss land. I'm going back into bliss land. So it actually naturally changes after that, because all of this is actually a self-directed process and program where the deeper part of yourself is going to say, okay, you ready for this now? Are you ready for, how about this? You ready for this one? And so it's you giving yourself the experience. But after that bliss bomb, then often the energy of the experience turns to, yeah, and you've been repressing this negative stuff, haven't you? And you haven't dealt with this either. And so then it gets more tumultuous for people in the sense that, wow, I'm now dealing with my crap. But you're dealing with your crap at such a high level of intensity that it's often just experienced as overwhelming, uncontrollable energy, which can be terrifying for the ego. So it takes a turn into, well, now you're getting into more personal stuff, and we're going to unwind that. And then after that, then there's a whole nother phase that can open up for people with actually being a more open and integrated conduit of the energy, which turns into a new phase of embodiment. But in other words, these are normal trajectories. These are things that we can expect. But if somebody is sold on the 5-MeO experience of, oh, it's so beautiful, everyone has such a beautiful time, that's just not true. And that there are these different elements, and it turns for people and goes in a different direction. And that's often, it comes up in integration calls and people want to know, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Oh, no, you didn't do anything wrong. This is a normal trajectory. And this is why this is actually significant for you. Again, I can only give that advice because I've been through it myself and I understand it. But for somebody who is just working from an outside model without a lot of inside understanding of this, this is where, unfortunately, people that get into oh, well, maybe you were attacked by an entity, or maybe that was your karma, or maybe you did the ceremony wrong, or you didn't set your intentions right. And in my opinion, all of that is profoundly misleading and just guiding people down a really destructive intellectual path. So again, it's about really getting into what is the full phenomenology of 5-MeO. How does it work as a process, and what kind of trajectories does it open up? And then understanding where somebody might be on that spectrum within their experiences. And if people have multiple experiences, I'm always asking them, okay, well, what was your first? What was your second? What was your third? What was the context? What changed for you? And kind of looking at all of those elements, that there really is a lot that needs to be learned here to really do this in a good way, and to do it properly in a way that isn't going to gaslight or mislead or just indoctrinate people with, like, well, here's a whole new set of beliefs for you.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because that's, you're going down a rabbit hole that I want to go down just briefly. And because that's what I see a lot in this space. And we talk a lot about this in the classes, like over spiritualization of these experiences with folks. And, what I see a lot of facilitators doing is just shifting people's beliefs from one structure that they've already created on their own to their now structure belief system. And
Yeah.
I've heard very similar things. This is your ancestors coming up and reminding you of things that you need to fix, or this is your karma or the entities. I've heard all this, and I think that's very destructive, and I think very misleading. And you're also taking away the opportunity for folks on some level to come to their own conclusion. I think on some level we can give them a little bit of guidance, we can lead them. Ultimately, they have to discover that truth on their own, and they will, but we can give them a good framework for it. But if that framework is just your own personal belief system, and again, I see that everywhere on social media, this is what's happening, and I'm like, maybe you don't know that, right? But you're holding it out as this truth, right? And to me, it's just a belief. So if all we're doing is shifting people from the belief that they came in with into our belief, we are absolutely just re-indoctrinating them into something that we believe that we don't know is true. And I don't think that's beneficial at all. I think it's
Yeah.
pretty harmful, to be honest.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes, from good intentions. But that's just where there's just a lot of people who, in my opinion, are just not well educated.
Yes.
And that I've said this a couple times already in our conversation, and I'll say it again, that I'm of the opinion that all of the things that I share in my education materials around 5-MeO, I say you can experience all of this directly for yourself.
Yes.
I'm not asking you to believe anything, and I'm not bringing in any kind of spiritual concepts or interpretations or metaphysics. I'm not going to be talking to you about your past lives. I'm not going to be talking to you about your ancestors or about your karma. That I always say my approach is a non-dual energetic approach. So non-dual, there's only one universal self. So whatever you've experienced, it's you in some capacity. And it presents as energy that you have to process through your body and through your being. And everything that you are is energy. So I try and make it as neutral as possible. Now, if somebody wants to go and believe about past lives and karma, that's fine. I think that if you reach a certain stage of self-knowledge, that I'm pretty convinced that you'll drop it eventually, because you'll find, like, I don't need these beliefs anymore, because they're beliefs. And this is not to say that people don't have these experiences, but here is where experiences are not always what they seem to be.
Yes.
And that having a nuanced understanding of these things, I think, really helps, and not just reinforcing, like, okay, well, that's your initial impression or your interpretation, but there might be a different way to understand that. And so trying to work with people in a way that I think is very neutral, I think is very, very important, but also being confident in what you're sharing. And so that's, again, why we want to educate people properly about all of these things.
Yeah, I think there's some of my favorite conversations, right? I enjoy let's talk about that. Is it multi-dimensions? Is there unlimited dimensions happening? Fun. That's all fun to me, right? But they're just beliefs, and they're not truths. And to me, if we're trying to sell beliefs off as truths, that's where it gets a little wonky. And again, that's why, once again, I touched on it. I think if you are facilitating this molecule, you know, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, these different levels of just being a guide or being a facilitator or being an integrated facilitator. And I know you have a different term, but the point is that that highest opportunity to help people, you know, shift and make the changes that a lot of them are seeking is someone that could be with them in the space, and then help them make sense of that experience, versus again just the facilitation of it and then letting folks just kind of wondering what potentially happened to them. Now my understanding of the class is it's a live class, so that I think is unique. I don't think anybody else has anything like this. You record the classes, so if somebody is unable to attend a class, they can go back and watch the recording the next day. So you don't have to have perfect attendance, although recommended. Um, when I look at your curriculum here, and it talks about integration session 1, integration session part 2, what's that about?
Well, so they're like in the actual syllabus of on those days of class, what we're going to do is kind of be going through a lot of the materials that I have here in the 5-MeO DMT integration book, where I talk about this is how I run an integration session with someone. These are the questions that I ask. This is the order in which I'm looking for information.
Okay.
This is how we're conducting that. So kind of getting really into the practical side of things. And then also we'll be including like this is something that some people have asked me so far, like, well, then how do you advertise yourself? How do you market yourself? How do you get clients? That we're going to also be looking at the practical side of things, covering like how I actually conduct integration sessions with people, how I bring all this knowledge in, what we do. Like a big part of what I do in integration sessions is I invite clients to bring video recordings of their session with 5-MeO, and we'll sit and we'll watch it together. And if it's
Yeah.
really long, I'll ask them to send it to me beforehand, and we'll go through and we'll talk about what's going on and how they're presenting energetically. And so giving people these tools to read these experiences and reflect back to the person to then reflect on, well, does that feel accurate to me? And sometimes also in integration sessions, I'm actually demonstrating different physical exercises that people can do, and we might do that together. So these are all, this is all the experience that I'm going to be bringing into these classes, of demonstrating as much of this as possible and just showing how it's done. Like again, that I really want to make this very practical in that sense. That this
Yeah.
is not just a theoretical class. There's a lot of theory being presented, but also focusing on the actual practice of putting this in place and working as an integration coach. And yeah, I'm also very much of the same opinion that I would like everyone who facilitates 5-MeO DMT to be educated and skilled in integration. However, like this is something I mentioned in the previous round of the facilitator course that we are teaching, that I said, I do consider these to be different roles and they're different
Yes.
skills. And that not everyone who is a good facilitator is necessarily going to be someone who's good at integration. And not necessarily everybody who's good at integration is going to want to be a
Yeah.
facilitator, be good at
It's
that. So
fair.
ideally, it's nice to have these roles combined, precisely because, as you say, often when people are served 5-MeO DMT, after that, they don't know who to turn to other than the person who facilitated for them. But sometimes facilitators are busy. It's like, oh, well, I'm on retreat. You know, I'm leading a retreat the next 2 weeks. I can't talk to you. So then who do you turn to? Um, and
And
again,
some don't have the interest. I mean, I've
yeah,
worked with facilitators that just don't have a passion for it. And if you don't have a passion for it, you're right, you probably shouldn't be stepping into it because it's a significantly important role. But I'd maybe add to it, if you're not doing it, you should find somebody that is highly skilled at integration.
yeah,
So folks just again aren't floundering. So yeah, maybe that was a little bit of a projection, because to me, as I was working with folks in the space, and I'm sitting with them afterwards, I felt ill-equipped, right? I'm like, I really want to provide the ideal amount of guidance for these folks to really help them maximize this. And that's just kind of how my perspective of my facilitation has changed over the years, from somebody that facilitated to the experience to how do I really help folks have this experience in a safe way, and use it for the maximum growth or maximum, perspective shift or change that they're looking for. And to do that, I need to be comfortable with this understanding, as we kind of talked about what's happening in the experience and then what to do with that. So essentially integration. But I think that's fair. Not everybody has an interest in it or has the time in it. And some folks just have a passion for facilitation. And then again, some folks just have a passion for the integration or, like I said, their therapist. Which again, I think if you're a therapist listening, I think this is an important one because more and more people are stepping into this space, and a lot of them are your clients. Because I'm speaking with these folks and I'm working with these folks, and I always ask them, "Are you working with a professional?" And probably 80% are, and a lot of them feel some level of trepidation or resistance to sharing that experience with their therapist, which I find troubling, to be perfectly honest. I'm like, if you can't share that you're about to have this experience with your therapist, you may need to find somebody you feel more comfortable with. But you're going to be meeting folks that are stepping into this experience. And as we touched on earlier, it's not therapy. I mean, it could evolve into therapy, but initially, unless they know what's happening, if they don't know what's happened in the space, it's going to be a significantly different process.
Yeah. So that actually brings me to like who the class is for. I think that would be a good thing to address at this point. So really what I'm thinking about in terms of this class is that there are two, or maybe I'd say there's three primary kinds of people that I'd like to get into this class, but also there's more that I would consider it open to. So I'll address that as well. But first of all, obviously, anyone who is maybe even already working as a psychedelic integration coach, but who doesn't know about 5-MeO and doesn't know what they don't know about 5-MeO.
Yeah.
This class is for you. This will make you a more well-rounded integration coach. And not that I want to diss on anyone or any programs or anything, but again, it is my opinion that if you are trained in standard psychedelic facilitation, you are not adequately prepared to deal with 5-MeO because it's too different, it's too unique, it's too powerful. So anybody who's already working as an integration coach is like, oh, I have people coming to me with 5-MeO, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. Well, this is a class that you will learn what you don't know. Secondly, I would like people who are facilitating 5-MeO, whether or not they really want to focus on integration services or not. I do think it's important for them to be properly educated about, well, what does integration even mean with 5-MeO, and then how do we apply it so that they're just more available to the people that they work with and are at least able to deal with the immediate response of somebody coming out of their session like, what just happened, and did I do it right, and oh my God, why, and there's just so much. You and I both know there's so much variability out there. There's people who have gone through like our course, and then there's people who have done like a weekend training, or there's people who have maybe they were served bufo once and they're like, oh, this is easy, I want to do this. So I would like to see more people just really get good at educations around it. And then there's also people out there who are not necessarily quote unquote professional facilitators, but this also comes up a lot in my integration calls with people. Sometimes the integration work is not with the client, it's with the facilitator, meaning that they're just serving their friends or their family because they've had a really powerful experience and they want to share that, but then they want to know like, wow, well, I gave it to this person and like this thing happened. Like what's going on here? How do I help this person? So you don't necessarily need to be a professional facilitator or working at a retreat center. And then also, I think that it'd be very useful for therapists or psychiatrists who are working in a therapeutic relationship with individuals who maybe are coming to them with, well, I went to Mexico and I had bufo. And then, oh, what's that? So I think, as we've been discussing, that this is something that's going to be happening more and more and more, that non-psychedelically trained therapists are going to be having clients who are working with these medicines. And, I'm even getting people um, in integration calls that said that, well, it was my therapist who suggested that I try 5-MeO. And then when I came
Yes.
back and said that I did it, but I didn't know what to do with it, they said, oh, well, then you contact Martin. So like those referrals are going out, that people are being educated, but why not just learn it yourself and then be able to be of more help? And that also is something that you mentioned that I think is very common. A lot of the clients that I have on the integration side are already working in different therapeutic modalities and maybe they've taken medications, maybe they've tried various spiritual approaches, maybe they've worked with other psychedelics, but they're seeing a therapist regularly, or they might have a psychiatrist. So there's a lot of crossovers.
Yeah.
Those are all the main people I want to get in the class. And then beyond that, honestly, this is just a great opportunity for anyone who simply wants to learn and is curious and wants a good education by a highly qualified professor, me. And like anybody who's read my books is like, wow, I'd love to be in a class with Martin. Well, like, this is an opportunity to do that and
Yeah.
deal with these materials. And again, I'm pulling from, like, these two books are the required reading for the class, and they will be made available to everybody in the class. But I'm pulling from all of these other books that I've produced, and I've got videos linked in, and then there's talks that I've given, and then there's places where I've read portions of the books that is like, okay, it's not required reading, but here's a video. So all of this material is accessible. And then also I've included, when we talk about embodiment and process, that I've got videos of me consuming 5-MeO DMT, and I've linked all of those in the class. Like, okay, we're going to watch this video because this was my experience. Again, that I know it from the inside out. This is not just abstract. This is something I used to tell my students. Formerly I was a professor of religious studies at Southern Oregon University, and I told them, you know, especially when it comes to like non-duality and this stuff, is like, some people study this stuff by, let's imagine that the nature of being is a pizza. And if you've never eaten a pizza, like, you don't know what pizza tastes like. Like, no one can really describe it to you, but you go and you eat it, and like, oh, okay, well, I'm learning something. And then if you're like, well, how do you do that? Then you could talk about like, well, I go in and then I'm observing how people are making the pizza, and I'm taking notes, and I'm like, okay, now I understand pizza. Um, but I said, well, I'm someone I've done it all. Like, I've made the dough, I've made the sauce, I've grated the cheese, I've eaten it, I've served it, I've tried different recipes. Just coming with a rich level of experience around these things. And that's what I want to bring into the class and share with others.
Yeah, I think you touched on it, but it did bring up that idea that that fourth person potentially is somebody like me when I was, first just consuming the medicine, taking the medicine, that wanted to have a better idea of what was happening with it, right? So even that individual, if you're somebody that's working with this medicine and you really want to have a better understanding of what's happening, there's nothing wrong with self-integration. I've pretty much self-integrated my whole life, because the folks that I did talk to about integration, I'm like, I don't think that's it. Or that's not really resonating with me. So a lot of it's just been from my own work, my own research and study. And that could have been done so much more efficiently and more accurately early on if I had access to some information like this. Again, starting with, what is that experience about? And I think, kind of in summary on this, I think, you know, I know we got in this conversation about talking about integration, and, we've really talked a lot about the class, but I think that's a good thing, because there's not anything out there like this right now. I teach an integration course with my wife, who's a therapist, and it's a great integration course, but invariably we'll meet somebody that does have a 5-MeO experience in there. And, my training's in somatic integration, right? Which is, feels pretty solid for this, but not as in depth as talking about the energetic experience and some of the other aspects that you're taking. So there's nothing out there that's really just specifically designed for 5-MeO DMT and what that experience is like. and more people are stepping into this space, which is why we've got the facilitation course, because this is expanding. Lots of folks are talking about psilocybin. Lots of people are talking about ayahuasca. Not a lot of really high trained, qualified folks are talking about this medicine that's, again, rapidly expanding. So there's an opportunity to really find a niche for yourself, as well as somebody that, like, this is my expertise, is working with folks in an integration side of 5-MeO DMT. But again, as you touched on, step one, what is happening in this experience? Yeah.
And, I just want to reinforce that there is a need for this. There is
Yes.
definitely a need for this. And I know that you and I both know that there is another course available out there on 5-MeO integration, but you go in and you watch videos. I'm a live instructor, and I do this professionally. And I also just want to put out there that as a professor, I've taught university level courses, I've taught international students, I've taught people from all around the world. And as an integration specialist, I also work with clientele from around the world, from all different backgrounds, all races, all religions, all ethnicities, genders, sexualities. And so the experience of 5-MeO DMT is not limited to any one particular group, culture, or people in the world right now. It's something that people are attracted to from all spectrums of life, and also across the political spectrum as well. And that there is a need for more diverse people in the field, because let's be honest, a lot of times people are, when we get into these integration calls with people, I am getting into the most intimate aspects of a person's life. I mean, we are often talking about their sexuality and sexual experiences. We're talking about their intimate relationships. We're talking about aspects of their lives where maybe they've been abusive or have been abused, or their traumas, or their criminal behavior and activity and what they did to overcome it, really getting into deep aspects of people's lives. And then also, again, in working with people around the world, that maybe their community was impacted by war or religious extremism or something like that. And often people are more comfortable really opening up with someone that they feel they can see themselves in.
Sure.
Capacity. So again, I work with people around the world. I do not look like everyone. And people are comfortable with me because they know me, and that I've put out so many materials that people are like, yeah, I can trust Martin. But it can be easier for people if, okay, you look like me, or you come from a similar background. And then also a lot of people who facilitate, that's the same thing of, I'm more comfortable with somebody who mirrors me more directly in my experience, in my life background. So there really is a need for diverse
Yes.
perspectives and people coming from different backgrounds. But here, like with the classes that we're offering, it's up to the students. Like, I can't change who I am. I can't be a different kind of person for someone. But I am here to give you this information so that then you can bring that back to whatever your community is,
Yeah.
whoever it is that you want to represent or who you want to work with. So I really do encourage. I am comfortable working with people from diverse backgrounds. I've done that for decades now. And I invite anyone to come into this class who just wants to learn more, and then hopefully give you the tools and the skills you need to, if you want to set up shop. And this is where the integration side is so much easier than being a facilitator. We don't have to worry about legal requirements and restrictions. We don't have to worry about, I'm serving somebody something that might not be legal in my jurisdiction, and what are my protections. That you can set up shop, and you can make networks with retreat centers and facilitators, and you don't have to worry about, am I jeopardizing my legal status as a person by doing this?
Well, I think you bring up a crucial point, and we were talking about this before class started. Two quick points, but the one I want to touch on first is the need for diversity in the space. It's been on more than one occasion. I usually work with a female partner. I've sat in front of female participants, and I could just tell the way that they were connecting with me wouldn't be the same as if they connected with the female co-facilitator. So that's an easy swap for me. I'm like, would you feel more comfortable with her? Let me just kind of shift her into that space. It could also go the opposite. I could be sitting in front of a female that feels more comfortable with a male, right? But this importance of diversity, again, we're the same. I feel I could work with anybody. It doesn't matter to me, but we've also done a lot of work on like egoic awareness. And I see a lot of these things, to me, they're not as important, but that's just my experience. So it makes sense that somebody could be sitting in front of me and would feel comfortable with somebody that looked differently, spoke differently, all these different levels of diversity, because I think diversity is a multitude of facets, language even, right? Which is something I've been really trying to encourage. You know, we work with a lot of international students. I actually served a good friend of mine from Ukraine. And although there's a good communication there, he would obviously have a more in-depth communication about some of this information with somebody that spoke his language, right? His native language. So diversity in this space is something that we talk a little bit about because we need it. So I think that's a great point of really encouraging folks to kind of step into this space and take this back to whatever your community may be, because there is a need for it.
Yeah, the language thing was actually something that I wanted to mention as well. That sometimes what happens in my integration calls with people is they bring in a translator because English is not their first language. And again, it's a reflection of this is an international phenomenon. This is happening all over the world. So I'd want to encourage anybody who's bilingual in English and their home language. And if you're interested in this course, like please take it so that you can speak directly. Because it's hard when it's okay, we have to go to the translator, then goes back to that person, then back to the translator, then back to me. And again, it's because there aren't enough people doing this. So that somebody who lives in the Swiss Alps, who's just had a Bufo experience, is like, I don't have anyone on the European continent I know who to contact and who speaks my language. And so they end up coming to me. I'm happy to be there for them. But wouldn't it be awesome if they could like call up somebody in the local community who speaks their language and let's just get into it, and then you can go much more in depth. And so there's just a need for diversity. There really, really is, because again, this 5-MeO is not owned by any culture in the world. It's not like, oh, it belongs to this indigenous group that's just, it doesn't exist. So it really has the potential as being this universal kind of experience. And then also the medicine itself takes us beyond our individuated identification. So it might, at the normal social level, it's important that I'm a man, I'm white, I come from middle class America, I was raised in a secular household, I don't have any religious tradition. But when we go into the totality of being, like, that's just my character. Like, the absolute nature of being has no race, has no gender. It is not masculine. It is not feminine. It is not your ancestors. It is not anybody else's ancestors. It is the totality of which all diversity is derived from. So it's universal. And we all have that within us. We all are the universal.
Perfectly articulated. Yeah.
But we're still interacting at the individuated level. And so therefore having representation is important. Having diversity is important.
Yes. And again, the meeting folks where they're at, because a lot of folks that are just stepping into this space, they may understand that, but not deeply understand it. So initially, again, these markers that, this character that we show up as is important to a lot of folks. But I'd say also, I think that's the exciting part. We've had this conversation before, how just honored I am to have created this relationship with you. And I mean this with humility, the impact of the work that we're trying to do and both of the classes, the facilitation class, we were talking prior to the start of this video that we've got a few folks that are therapists in the Ukraine that are working with soldiers coming back with PTSD that want to facilitate this medicine because they see the benefit of it. We've got a couple folks from Iceland that we both talked to. They're going to be in the facilitation class and probably do the integration class. We've got some folks from Germany, all over the place. And my ego loves that on some level, right? And I'm like, wow, that we've created something that's impactful enough that the word is spreading to folks all over the world. And also just makes me realize the importance of the part that we're talking about, the diversity in the space, and getting this message to all corners of the globe, because this medicine is spreading. It is moving outside of our little bubble, and folks need all sorts of folks to be well trained, and educated on what's happening with this medicine and how to help people really work with it and integrate it and just get the maximum benefit. I don't know if I love that terminology, but maximize the benefit for whatever healing or interest or growth that they want from it. So kudos to you, because you've been an instrumental part in, again, creating the facilitation class, but now this integration class. I'm really excited that I mentioned it to you and you ran with it. I'm like, I could help you. And you're like, I got it. And you
Love
did
a
it.
project.
You created it. I'm like, I'm out of his way. He's moving and shaking. And what I can see on the platform here is phenomenal. Again, nothing but love to my friends out there that have again, as you mentioned, one other group that has a 5-MeO integration course. I love those folks. I love the work that they're trying to do, and I love the work that they're doing, and they're instrumental in this space. This isn't competition, but if I'm looking to get the most in-depth education and hands-on, so to speak, understanding of this work, this would be the course that I would lean towards. And I'm biased, but I'm not. I'm a pretty honest person. And again, from what I could see here and just knowing you and seeing your body of work, I think if this is a space that you want to step into it right. Step into it with the opportunity to get the full depth of this, and an opportunity to be live in class with you. I've had an opportunity to be able to ask questions and interact with you, and hear you articulate concepts and ask questions to you. That's something that people shouldn't look at lightly. That's a huge opportunity on so many levels. So I appreciate you being part of this journey for me and the facilitation class, and I'm excited for what you're bringing out now with your integration course, and again, starting February 26th.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do it too. I've been enjoying teaching in the facilitation course. I'm really looking forward to this. That I tend to be kind of a lone wolf kind of person. Like I do a lot of my own thing, and so this is going to be me doing my own thing. So it like really jives with my sense of like things that I really like to invest myself in. And like this is the first time I've created a syllabus since I got laid off from Southern Oregon University with COVID. So it's been like a few years since I've taught or put together a syllabus, and I had so much fun putting this together. And I'm really looking forward to it. So I just wanted to, for the listening, watching audience, it starts February 26th. It's a 9-week course, but it's going to go for 10 weeks because there's 1 week in there where my son has a spring break and we're not going to be home. So it's going to go for 10 weeks, but it's only 9 weeks of instruction. Each class is Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. Going to be recorded and uploaded so that if people miss class, they can go and view that later. If anybody wants to ask me any questions about it, you can just shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com. You can, of course, go to mindscapeinstitute.com, go to courses, and then all the courses that you and your wife are offering, the facilitation course, the integration course are all there. And then you click on that and hit the opt-in button, and you submit your name and your email, and that gives you more information, the opportunity to pay. The price for the course is $2,500 for new students, or if they are former or current students of Mindscape, there's a $500 discount. So $2,000, asking people at the very least to reserve a spot, a $500 non-refundable deposit. The class is already 1/3 full. It's going to be limited to 15 individuals, so we'll see if it fills up. But definitely a lot of people have expressed interest. But if you want to get in, I encourage people like go ahead and do that and at least make a down payment. And then we could talk about a payment plan if you need it.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it too. Folks have asked me about it. I said he's been very open to creating some level of a payment plan, understanding that that works well for some folks. So if that's something that you're interested in, again, there will be a link below on both of our pages to kind of reach out to Martin and work through that. knowing him, I'm going to put words in his mouth, because most of the classes that we've run have been this way. We don't want finances to keep people out of these types of courses and to prevent people from getting education. So we've both been extremely flexible with trying to help make it work for folks. So again, not to put words in Martin's mouth, but I'm sure he'll be flexible with you on creating some sort of payment schedule to make this work for whatever your income needs are. What would you like to say in closing?
Uh, Mainly, Kirby, I just want to thank you for even working with me originally, bringing me in and supporting me. Actually, with some of the other folks we've been talking about, actually, I just had a call earlier today, and they explained to me why, because of the whole Symposia thing, that Symposia started coming after them, that they had my materials on their website, and Symposia started coming after them, and they said that, oh, we have to take these educational materials down from this 5-MeO DMT education website. And that's just the reality that I've been facing ever since Symposia decided that they were going to create this narrative of me of being some kind of abusive person. So I've been dealing with the repercussions of that for a number of years now, and that you've stepped up and you've been brave and you've had integrity about it, and you've invited me in, and you've given me a place where I can flourish and to share the information that I have. And I just want to express my gratitude for you having the temerity and willingness to even allow me in and to give me space to share what I have to share. That it really means a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. I think, again, for anybody that has any questions on it, I'm a pretty damn good judge of character. I've been reading people my entire life. And if I didn't think that not only were you a good human, and, uh, outside of just your ability to articulate this, I say this to all my students because there's no ego in this. To me, I'm like, he's the most articulate and well-written person on this topic. We've talked about, I've been working on a book, but I keep getting stuck because I'm like, this is never going to meet the standards of what Martin's already put out there. And I'm trying to let go of that and be like, you do you. But you bring so much to this space. And I think the fact that some folks have kind of turned their backs on you or shunned you is a massive, it's a letdown, but also I think it doesn't help the space. It hurts the space. You bring so much to the space as a pioneer in the space and a founder of a lot of the work that we're doing in this space. So I think folks that aren't listening and aren't paying attention to you are absolutely missing out. So to me, to have you be a part of anything that I do is an easy answer. And I'm a big boy. I'm not concerned about any backlash. Cancel me. I don't care. Because the people that we were working with together and teaching together and have these opportunities have had nothing but 5-star reviews and gratitude to what you bring to the space. And so to me, I couldn't be more happy to have you. So I appreciate your time.
All right. Well, thanks, Kirby, and looking forward to starting this class. And some people have already asked me, we'll see how this first class goes. Then maybe I'll offer it again later the year. I don't know. We'll see. I'm just going to start with this first class. So if you want in, get in now. But yeah, there's a good chance I'll offer it again, maybe again later this year, maybe next year. We'll see how things go.
Easy enough. Well, I appreciate your
I gotta
time.
save time to record music. So
All right. All right. Take care.